everybody doing? Let's shine a little light. I had the honor to sit with Yitzi Hurwitz. He wrote that song, Shine a Little Light. And he's a rabbi who has ALS and who only has the movement of his eyes to communicate with. And using his computer, and it takes tremendous effort, he's able to write commentary on the Torah portion. An incredible man, incredible individual. His wife Dina, another incredible individual. And I'm just so grateful that I was able to spend some quality time with him this afternoon. So let's dedicate our learning to Rabbi Yitzi Hurwitz. May he have a miraculous healing, and may he continue to inspire people around the world. Shine a little light. Who's in the house on a Monday? Monday evening. Sharon in New Jersey, Bill in Missouri, Joe in the Inland Empire, Paul in the Great Northwest, Mary Ann says Shalom, Bella in Florida, Barb in the house, Sharon going to a rally, Lucy in Minnesota, Guy in Ohio, James in Indianapolis, Ella says Shalom, Marjorie in Georgia, and Frank in St. Pedro. Welcome, everybody. Apparently there was a rally in Westlake Village here in Southern California. And reports are coming out fast and furious that it was a pro-Palestinian rally, and an elderly Jewish man died there. And I read a story that said how it happened. But my friend, Rabbi Michael Barkley, was there, and he says that all the reports coming out are not yet accurate. So please wait to share any stories about this incident. The police have the phone of the person who was involved, and I guess at least confronting this elderly Jewish man who ended up dead. They're going to review the evidence, and I'm sure we'll get the full story soon. So let us not jump to conclusions. And let's just pray once again. May peace, a secure peace, be restored in and around Israel as soon as possible, and so as many lives as possible will be saved. Okay. Mishnah number 7 here in Tractate Kiddushin, the 20th volume of the Talmud. Our daf, today's page 80. There are 82 pages in this tractate. So it didn't make sense to double up today or tomorrow, and that means that Wednesday we're making a siyum on Tractate Kiddushin and a siyum on Seder Nashim. And with God's help, that very day, we'll open Tractate Bava Kama and continue with Tractate Bava Kama and Seder Nazikin. So big, exciting, bring something to make a l'chaim on Wednesday. God willing, we'll make our siyum on Wednesday. Okay, Mishnah number 7. With regard to one who went overseas with his wife and returned with his wife and children and said, "This is the woman who went overseas with me, and these are her children," he is not required to bring proof with regard to the lineage of the woman, since her lineage was already investigated at the time of their marriage. Is every woman's lineage investigated at the time that she gets married? I mean, a Jewish woman and a Jewish man? No. Whose lineage is investigated at the time of their marriage? A priest. This whole Mishnah is referring to the case of a priest of unflawed lineage, who went on a trip. Either he took his wife with him, or he met her while overseas, came back with children. And the question is, do we have grounds to assume that the children, meaning the son of this priest, well, son or daughter, right, that the son is not a halal, and that the daughter is not a halala. That if it's a son, that he's qualified to serve in the temple when the temple is standing, and if it's a daughter, that she is qualified to marry another priest. That's what we're investigating. And so this whole Mishnah is about a priest who returned with some family members. So If he returned without the woman, and he said, my wife died and these are her children, he must bring proof that the children were born to his wife, but he does not need to bring proof with regard to the lineage of the woman, right? Because he married her before he went overseas. If he left on this journey when he was unmarried, and he said upon his return, I married a woman overseas, and this is she, and these are her children, so then he must bring proof with regard to the lineage of the woman, but he is not required to bring proof with regard to the lineage of the children. And if he said, I married a woman overseas and she died and these are her children, then he is required to bring proof with regard to both the lineage of the woman and the children, right? To make sure that she wasn't a halala, right? And that the son, the whole point is that priests were held to this very high standard to make sure that any priest who was going to be bringing offerings in the Holy Temple on behalf of the Jewish people did not somewhere in his lineage violate prohibitions on the priesthood and who they are and are not permitted to marry. So, the Gemara on Mishnah number 7. Rabba bar Rav Huna says, and all of the statements that he is not required to bring proof with regard to the lineage of the children are said in a case where they, the children, cling to her and treat the woman like their mother. So the sages taught that if a man says, I married a woman overseas, he must bring proof with regard to the lineage of the woman, but he is not required to bring proof with regard to the lineage of the children. And he must bring proof with regard to the lineage of the adult children, but he's not required to bring proof with regard to the lineage of the minor children. Why? Because the attachment of the minor children to their mother is apparent. So it can be assumed that these minor children who cling to their mother are in fact her children. Now, in what case is this statement said? It is in the case of one who said that he married one woman. But when it is the case of one man, priest, who said he married two women overseas, back when that was permitted, it hasn't for 1,000 years, but when it was possible, when by Torah law, a man can have more than one wife. So if he came back and said that he married two women overseas, so then he must bring proof with regard to the lineage of both the woman and the children, with regard to the adult ones and with regard to the minor ones. Even if they cling to the woman whose lineage has been found to be unflawed, they might be the children of the other wife and are merely being raised by this one. So Reish Lakish said, and now we're on page 80a, the sages taught that the children's attachment to her proves that she is their mother only with regard to the consecrated items of the border, meaning terumah, right? The tithe of produce that is set aside for priests. Only priests may eat of it. It is considered holy food that only priests can eat. And both the priest and the terumah must be in a state of ritual purity, tahara, at the time that the priest is going to eat it. A priest can also feed the terumah to members of his immediate household. So where are we? But with regard to lineage, this proof is not relied upon, and her daughters may not marry priests. And Rabbi Yochanan says if the children cling to her, they are considered hers in all regards, even with regard to lineage. And generally, when Rabbi Yochanan makes a statement, the law follows Rabbi Yochanan. Now, the Gemara comments, and Rabbi Yochanan follows his standard line of reasoning. As Rabbi Chia bar Abba says that Rabbi Yochanan says, the court flogs one about whom witnesses testify that he violated a prohibition on the basis of presumptive status, even if there is no testimony to definitively establish that the person violated a prohibition, as will be explained. And what we're talking about here is, for example, if a brother and sister have sex, okay, so that's incest, that's a death penalty offense. Now, in order to actually apply the death penalty, you would need witnesses who saw not only what happened, but actually witnesses who saw that the brother and sister were warned, if you two sleep together, it's a death penalty offense. And then they did it immediately after the warning was given in the presence of witnesses, And then the witnesses saw that the two of them slept together. So you certainly need, eyewitness testimony from two witnesses in order to, apply the death penalty. So what are we talking about presumptive status? And what that means is a brother and sister, have this prohibition in the Torah that they can't commit incest. But how do we know that they're brother and sister? Right? You don't have to bring two witnesses to testify that the brother and sister are in fact a brother and sister. If there has reason to have, they have a presumptive status of brother and sister according to what? Like they've been raised in the same house. Everyone has seen them behave as brother and sister for years. So now we don't have to bring an additional pair of witnesses to establish that they are in fact brother and sister. Now that's why I made the title a little bit facetiously, but not really. Can Greg marry Marsha? Right. So I assume many of us are old enough to remember the Brady Bunch. Not that we were necessarily around when it was being released initially, but it was on reruns, for years and years and years. And Greg and Marsha were, children who grew up together in a household that was a blended household, right? So Greg came with his father, who was a widower, and Marsha came with her mother, who was a widow, I'm pretty sure. And so Greg and Marsha were not related to each other at all, right? They each had separate parents. But they grew up in a household that was shared as brother and sister. So in a situation like that, the world would look at them as brother and sister. And if they, slept together, you might apply the death penalty to them. I mean, there would be all kinds of extenuating circumstances. And truthfully, the death penalty was never applied in that situation. The question, though, is, could it apply? Right? Not did it apply, would it apply? Are they actually going to be executed? But would it apply? And now we might also be talking about carcass, death at the hands of the heavenly court. But if it was, an adultery situation. But right now we're talking about incest, right? Prohibitions. So the point here is that while we might need to bring witnesses to the actual deed of the prohibited intercourse, the presumptive status that they are brother and sister, that will not necessarily require two witnesses to come and establish it. Similarly, the court stones or burns one about whom witnesses testify that he violated a prohibition, resulting in court-imposed capital punishment, on the basis of presumptive status. It's not that we need two witnesses to establish every element of the crime. It's the deed itself that has to be witnessed, but the fact that they have a relationship that would lead them to be in that position where the death penalty would apply, that can be taken as a presumptive status. However, even though we would do that, and we might even apply the death penalty based on that presumptive status, we don't burn terumah based on presumptive status, as will be explained. So, how so? The court flogs one about whom witnesses testify that he violated a prohibition on the basis of presumptive status, in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. As Rabbi Yehuda says, if a woman had among her neighbors the presumptive status of a menstruating woman, right? So for whatever reason, there's a bunch of women that, live together and they know when each of them is menstruating. I believe I heard somewhere in my life that if women live together in a house, it often happens that their cycles can synchronize. But at any rate, it's not so unexpected that women who are close friends, whatever, might know which one is menstruating when. Okay, so if she had among her neighbors the presumptive status of a menstruating woman, and now witnesses testified that her husband engaged in sexual intercourse with her, which is prohibited, that's the law of the Nida, so then he is flogged due to her status as a menstruating woman. Right? It wouldn't happen that he's flogged unless witnesses saw him do this, but the fact that she's a menstruating woman, that could be established by her presumptive status. Now, the court stones or burns, in other words, court-imposed death penalty, one about whom witnesses testify that he violated a prohibition resulting in court-imposed capital punishment on the basis of presumptive status. And what's the case? This is in accordance with the opinion of Rabba bar Rav Huna. As Rabba bar Rav Huna says, with regard to a man and a woman, and a boy and a girl who grew up together in one home as a single family, the presumption is that they are related. Like the Greg and Marsha situation, even absent witness testimony to that effect. Therefore, they are stoned due to engaging in intercourse with each other if the male child, now an adult, engages in intercourse with the woman, as it is considered incestuous sexual intercourse. If he sleeps with a girl that he grew up with as his sister, and everyone saw them grow up that way, then it doesn't matter that originally they weren't related because they have a presumptive status of siblings. And they are burned due to engaging in intercourse with each other if the man engages in intercourse with the female child, now an adult, since she is considered his wife's daughter. Right? So it's a different death penalty. I don't really know the details of the situation, but I think there's a celebrity situation where, a man married a woman who brought a child into the household that was her child or maybe her adopted child. And this man ended up, divorcing his wife and shacking up with the child. Bad. Very bad. Now, the Gemara cites a related incident. Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi says that Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says in the name of Bar Kapara, an incident occurred involving a woman who came to Jerusalem with a child riding on her shoulders in the manner of a mother and son. And she raised him. Right? So people saw a woman carrying a small child, arriving in a new city. And everyone said, okay, well, that's the mother and her son. And then years later, that mother who, and this young man who's now an adult, had sex, right? Right? And an incident occurred involving a woman who came to Jerusalem with a child riding on her shoulders in the manner of a mother and son, and she raised him. And he eventually engaged in intercourse with her. And they brought them to the court and stoned them for violating the prohibition against a mother and son engaging in intercourse. And this was not because this young man was definitely her son, as they had no testimony to that effect, but because he clung to her when she arrived in the city in the manner of a child clinging to its mother. He had the presumptive status of being her son, and this looks like a mother who slept with her son, and that's a death penalty offense. Rabbi Yochanan stated, but one does not burn terumah on the basis of presumptive status. Now, this is to say, are you kidding? You're going to enforce a death penalty in some situations, and it even happened in one incident based on presumptive status, but you are not going to burn terumah? Sounds like the death penalty offense is so much more serious. And yet you'll use presumptive status there, but you won't use presumptive status just, to burn terumah, that, okay, it's consecrated food, but now you're going to burn it because, it somehow became impure and therefore priests can't eat it. So what's going on? As Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says, one burns terumah on the basis of presumptive status. Right? Shimon ben Lakish is Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish says you burn terumah based on presumptive status. And Rabbi Yochanan says one does not burn terumah in this case, and we follow Rabbi Yochanan. And the Gemara comments, and Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan follow their standard lines of reasoning in this matter. As we learned in the Mishna, Teharos 3:8, if a ritually impure child, right, a child that came into contact with some source of ritual impurity, like a dead creeping thing, so then the child became tameh, and he is found alongside ritually pure started dough, and he has risen dough in his hand that may have been removed from the larger portion of started dough. In that situation, Rabbi Meir deems the started dough pure, since there is no proof that the child touched it, as he might have been given the piece by someone else. And the rabbis, the majority who disagree with Rabbi Meir, deem the dough that's sitting there next to the child as impure, meaning probably the child touched it. right? There's a big thing of dough that needs to be tahor, needs to be ritually pure, presumably because it's going to be served as bread that's going to be used in the temple, or it's going to become terumah, or we're going to take challah from it to give to a priest. So for whatever reason, it needs to be tahor, ritually pure. And there's a boy that's known to be ritually impure. For whatever reason, he came into contact with some source of ritual impurity. And he's holding some dough in his hand while he's sitting nearby this dough that needs to be ritually pure. The dough in the boy's hand is for sure ritually impure because it's in contact with the boy. So the question is, did the boy touch the large piece of dough and render all of it impure? We don't know for sure, but given that it's a little kid, like a toddler, and he's already holding some dough in his hand, it seems quite likely that he got it from that big piece of dough that's going to become, let's say, challah bread. And so we have to render all of that dough impure, and it can't be used for anything where there's a need that it retain its status of ritual purity, that it remain tahor. And the rabbis, where am I? Wait a minute. And the rabbis deem it impure, as they assume that the boy touched the started dough. The child is presumed to be impure. Oh, so we don't even know for sure that the child is impure. We just presume that the child is impure because little kids touch things all the time. Right? So the child is presumed to be impure because it is the manner of a child to handle items. And we discussed that case. And what is the reasoning of Rabbi Meir? He holds that a majority of children handle items, in this case the dough, that are within reach, and the minority do not handle items within reach. And the dough itself retains a presumptive status of purity since its impurity has not been definitively determined. And if one appends the minority of children who do not handle items within reach to the presumptive status of purity that the dough has, the last thing we know about the dough is that it was pure, then the force of the majority of children who do handle items is weakened, right? We have two things. Okay, yes, it's true, most kids touch stuff, but some kids don't. And we know that that dough, the last time it was inspected, was in a state, or the last time, when the adult left it, was in a state of ritual purity. So since we have two reasons that we could say, well, actually the dough retains its purity, that's going to counteract the fact that most kids handle stuff and might come into contact both with impurity and with this dough. But we have two reasons to say, yeah, but there's a good possibility that the kid didn't touch it. That's according to Rabbi Meir. But the rabbis who overrule Rabbi Meir, what do they say? And the rabbis contend that in a case where the majority is followed, the minority is considered like it does not exist. Consequently, there is a conflict between the determining factors of the majority of impure children who handle items within their reach and the presumptive status of purity of the dough. In that case, the majority takes precedence, and we deem that this child who was found holding some dough next to this big pile of dough that needs to remain pure, we say that he must have touched it, and the dough is deemed impure. Now, Reish Lakish says, in the name of Rabbi Oshaya, this law of a child is an example of a presumption, i.e., that children handle items within their reach. And based on this presumption, one burns terumah based on it, since the rabbis hold that it is sufficiently established that the dough has become impure to allow it to be burned. Now remember, when you're going to say that, okay, we're going to deem it impure out of uncertainty, okay, if impure out of uncertainty, it sounds like we don't burn it, we just set it aside and it can't be eaten or used. But burning it is because we're, have a strong reason to believe that it became impure. Rabbi Yochanan says this is not the presumption that one burns terumah based on it. Rather, the dough is set aside and may be neither eaten nor burned, right? Because its impurity is only based on uncertainty. We're not going to go out and burn it. And that's the view of Rabbi Yochanan, and that's the law. Now the Gemara asks, but if so, according to Rabbi Yochanan, what is the presumption that one burns terumah based on it? What do you need? What kind of presumption will we burn terumah based on it? And the Gemara answers, as we learned in a Baraisa, in a case where the started dough is in the house and creeping animals which impart impurity when dead and frogs which do not impart impurity are also present there. And pieces of an unidentified creature were found in the started dough. So, if the majority of the creatures in the house are creeping animals, then the dough is impure, since the presumption is that the pieces are from a creeping animal. If the majority are frogs, then we deem the started dough pure. And the Gemara comments, it is taught in a Baraisa in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, there is a principle that when a possible case of impurity cannot be verified, even if it occurred in a private domain, where generally cases of uncertain impurity are deemed impure, it is deemed pure. Because two things do not have the capacity to be questioned, i.e., one cannot verify what happened through investigation. And yet, in these two cases, the sages deemed them as things that have the capacity to be questioned and rendered them impure in cases of uncertainty in a private domain. And the two cases are that of a child and an additional law. The case of a child is that which we said. We find this child holding some of the dough. And all of the dough is deemed impure, since the child cannot be asked whether or not he rendered the dough impure. And what is the other law? Well, if pure started dough that was located inside the house and chickens and impure liquids were present there, and there were found to be small holes in the dough where the chickens had pecked it, in that case the dough is held in suspension. It is neither eaten nor burned, since the chickens may have drunk from the impure liquids before they pecked at the dough, but there is no proof of this. And despite this being a case where they cannot be asked, which generally would result in the dough being deemed pure, here it is deemed impure due to the uncertainty. And the fact that in the second case of the Baraisa is not deemed to be definitely impure supports the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, who holds that in the case of the child, the status of the dough also remains a matter of uncertainty. Now, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says they taught this law only in the case of a white liquid, when the appearance of the peck marks in the dough provides no proof of whether the chickens had previously drunk from the liquid. But in the case of red impure liquid, if it is so that they had pecked, it would be known that they had drunk from the liquid, since the peck marks would be colored red. So the Gemara asks, even if the liquid were red and there were no red marks on the dough, how can one definitively say that they did not peck? Perhaps the dough absorbed the liquid, leaving no identifiable mark. And Rabbi Yochanan says the distinguished, i.e. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, heard this matter, but he did not hear its interpretation, and he should have supplied an additional detail. They taught this law only in the case of a clear liquid, which can be absorbed in the dough without leaving a stain. What is meant by clear? It means that in which the reflection of a child is recognizable when he peers into it. But in the case of a murky liquid, this law was not stated, since the liquid would leave a mark. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 7. Before we go to Mishnah number 8, I'll just mention, since we often talk about creeping animals, right? So when we which is a sheretz, right? Sheritzim is the plural. So these are the animals, right? What imparts ritual impurity, right? So if you touch a menstruating woman, that imparts ritual impurity. If you touch a corpse, that imparts the strongest kind of ritual impurity. It takes a week to be purified from it. It requires the sprinkling of the water with the ashes of the red heifer in it. Very difficult to become purified from corpse tumah. Menstruating woman is a much lighter version of tumah. A dead creeping thing coming into contact with food or into the airspace in a clay vessel. That's another kind of ritual impurity, somewhat of a light form of ritual impurity. But these creeping animals, and they have to be dead to impart this ritual impurity. What are these creeping animals, since we've mentioned them so many times? So says Rav Steinsaltz, there are 8 creeping animals whose carcasses impart tumah, ritual impurity, upon contact. And there is no clear oral tradition with regard to the identity of the animals listed in the Torah. Therefore, determining their identity involves educated conjecture. Among the suggestions offered are a rat, a mouse, a dab lizard, a gecko, a monitor lizard, a skink, and a chameleon. So there's a little bit of illumination on the identity of the Sheratzim. Okay, Mishnah number 8, and we are on page 80b now. Mishnah number 8 here of chapter 4, the final chapter of Tractate Kiddushin. A man may not be secluded with 2 women, lest he sin with them. But one woman may be secluded with 2 men. Rabbi Shimon says even one man may be secluded with 2 women when one of them is his wife. And in that situation, he may even sleep in the same inn with 2 women because his wife guards him from sinning. He could even be in the same inn with 2 other women in addition to his wife. And why are we not concerned that this could lead to licentious behavior? Because his wife is with him and she will keep him from sinning. And they further said that a man may be secluded with his mother and with his daughter and sleep alongside them with bodily contact without clothes, since there's no concern that they will engage in sexual intercourse. And when they, the son or daughter, have grown up, then this one sleeps in her garment and that one sleeps in his garment, but they may share a bed, right? Relatives can be trusted to share a bed without engaging in incest. That is what we learned right there. But non-relatives are not trusted to share a bed lest they are overcome by their lustful urges. Now the Gemara. Sorry. What is the reason that a man may not be secluded with 2 women, but a woman may be secluded with 2 men? And the school of Eliyahu taught this is because women are of, I'm just reading what it says, because women are of light mind and they are more easily seduced. Okay, let's get a note from Rav Steinsaltz on this. Rashi explains that women are more easily seduced than men are. Another possible meaning of this phrase is that they are not aware of the severity of the transgression because they're less likely to be Torah scholars. Other commentaries, Rabbeinu Yehonatan of Lunel and the Meiri, explain that it means that each would be willing to cover up for the other's transgressions. Women cover for each other. Men, by contrast, tend to publicize the transgressions of their peers and colleagues, right? Men are much more the gossips and just expose their colleagues who make transgressions, where women are actually more likely to cover for each other. That's according to these commentators. Okay, so the Gemara asks, from where are these matters that it is prohibited for a man to be secluded with multiple women derived? Right, for sure, a man and a woman who are not related cannot be secluded. Right, we would just, the assumption is, why are they secluded? Something bad could have happened there. It's not permitted. If there's 2 men, if there's a man with 2 women, we are concerned, right, that something licentious might have happened there. And from where is this prohibition derived? Rabbi Yochanan says in the name of Rabbi Yishmael, from where is there an allusion from the written Torah to the prohibition against seclusion? This is Deuteronomy 13:7. As it is stated concerning the one who incites others to idolatrous worship. If your brother, the son of your mother, entices you. What does this mean? Rabbi Yishmael considers why the Torah uses the example of the son of your mother. But is it only the son of a mother who entices? Doesn't the son of a father entice, right? Your brother who entices you, right? It's going to be somebody who's close to you, he has gotten into idolatry, and he might try to talk you into go doing that thing with him, right? So that's what the Torah is talking about. So is it only going to be your maternal brother who's going to entice you to go and commit this terrible sin, but your paternal brother wouldn't do that? That's what the Gemara is asking. So rather, what the verse means to say to you is this: a son may be secluded with his mother. Consequently, if a woman has 2 sons from 2 different husbands, they will both stay close to her. So the Torah therefore uses the example of the son of your mother because half-brothers who share a mother become close to each other. By contrast, half-brothers who share a father will not become close, since one's father's wife, who is not one's mother, is a forbidden relative, and it is prohibited to be secluded with those whom relations are forbidden by the Torah. But in other words, if a woman, even just practically speaking, if a woman, right, custody usually goes to the mom. So if a woman has two different husbands, is married, divorced, then has another husband, so she has sons by two different men, most likely the sons are growing up in her house and they're going to grow up like brothers and be close to each other. But if a man has sons by two different women, most likely those sons are growing up in separate households, so they're not going to be so close to each other, just as a practical matter. But here we're learning something a little bit different about who is going to live in whose house, just based on the law of prohibited relationships, meaning that would lead to incest. Now, since the verse merely alludes to the prohibition against seclusion, the Gemara asks, with regard to what is the plain meaning of the verse written, i.e. the context of enticement to idolatrous worship, why does it emphasize the son of your mother? And Abaye said the verse is speaking, utilizing the style of, it is not necessary. It is not necessary to state that one should not be enticed by the son of a father who hates him due to their rivalry for their father's inheritance and therefore gives him bad advice. Rather, the same is true even of the son of a mother who does not hate him, since they are not rivals for the same inheritance, as each inherits from his own father. One might therefore say that he should listen to him and accept his advice. And the verse consequently teaches us that he should pay no heed to his enticements. Now the Gemara comments, shall we say that the Mishna is not in accordance with the opinion of Abba Shaul? As it is taught in a Baraisa, if a child dies any time during the first 30 days after his birth, he is not given the same kind of funeral as an older child, but rather he is carried out, held in the bosom of a woman, not on a bier, and buried by one woman and two men. But he may not be buried by one man and two women due to the prohibition against seclusion. Right? We're not concerned that two men and one woman would end up having some kind of group scene, but we are concerned if it's one man and two women. So even in this situation of taking a baby out to burial, I mean, what kind of people are going to get all lusty thoughts in that situation? And yet, it's to teach you the extent of this prohibition that you never allow one man and two women to be secluded together. And Abba Shaul says he may even be buried by one man and two women. And this indicates that Abba Shaul deems it permitted for a man to be secluded with two women, at least in the situation of the funeral. Now the Gemara rejects this. You can even say that the Mishna is in accordance with the opinion of Abba Shaul, as he permits it only in the case of the Baraisa, where there's a funeral, a baby has died. Okay, these people are not thinking lusty thoughts. Because at the time of acute mourning, right, the mourner right after the death of a close relative, one's inclination to sin is broken. And there is no concern that this man in the company of two women might come to sin. But the rabbis, the majority who disagree with Abba Shaul and render seclusion forbidden of a man and two women, even in the wake of an infant death, hold in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Yitzchak. As Rabbi Yitzchak says, as follows, with regard to the verse, why does a living man complain, a powerful man, due to his sins? It's a verse from Lamentations 3:39. Even at the time of a person's acute mourning, his inclination to sin overpowers him, right? Or can overpower him. And the Gemara asks, and how does Abba Shaul explain this verse? And the Gemara answers, when that was written, it was written with regard to one who complains about God's ways. And this is what the verse is saying. Why does one complain about God's ways and claim that he has been treated unjustly? Has he overpowered his sins? God responds, the life I have given him is sufficient for him, and he deserves no more. I mean, it's interesting, right? Like somebody who complains that God is running the world wrong, Okay, that's a sin. And you can say that a person would be overpowered by his evil inclination, in the wake of some calamity, right? And that seems to be what they are discussing. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. And the rabbis are concerned about the possibility of sin even in times of acute mourning. Like that incident involving a certain woman, as there was an incident, this is crazy. There was an incident where a woman removed her husband from his grave. What? When visiting her husband's grave, she engaged in intercourse with a man who was tasked with guarding the body of a corpse of a person who was executed by the king. Meanwhile, that body, right, this is crazy, right? I actually have heard this, that this is not a Jewish superstition, as far as I know, but I know that in England, it was a superstition that if you could get a piece of the body of a convict that was publicly executed, like from a hanging, and you could get like the dead man's hand, like that was considered to be a talisman of tremendous good luck to have in the home, right? So that's why you can imagine that there was this man, who was a guard working for the king, and his job was to guard the corpse of the executed prisoner. So he's in the cemetery keeping guard over that corpse. Meanwhile, this woman, unrelated to the execution, she comes to the cemetery to visit her dead husband in his grave. And somehow the king's guard and the widow strike up a conversation, end up getting jiggy, doing the deed. And while they're doing that, the corpse from the execution gets stolen. And now the woman, to sort of be of service to her new boyfriend, says, okay, well, you need a body, so that you don't get in trouble because you failed in your job of keeping watch over the corpse. So why don't you just dig up my husband's body and use that? Crazy story. But apparently this happened. This was an incident that happened, right? When visiting her husband's grave, she engaged in intercourse with a man who was tasked with guarding the body of one executed by the king. Meanwhile, that body was taken. So she suggested that they disinter her husband so that the guard could claim that he had fulfilled his task properly. And this incident demonstrates that even at a time of acute mourning, one may, or at the time of mourning, right, her husband was, I guess, fresh enough in the ground that the body could be used for this purpose. So even at a time of mourning, people have an evil inclination that will lead them to sin. Right? This is proof that people will sin even at the time of their greatest grief. May we never hear such stories again. Okay, Bill. I'm sure we've covered it and I forgot, or we'll cover it in tractates to come, but I've been wondering this for a while. The death penalty is very, very hard to be applied. But I'm given to understand, perhaps incorrect, that capital cases like murder are different. So what is the process for applying the death penalty in the case of a murder, and how is it distinct from other cases? I'm not so sure that it is different. If we're talking about capital cases, right? So what are the actual death penalty cases? It's some kind of a rape or other prohibited sexual thing, or avodah zarah, idolatry, or murder, right? I think that there might be some other death penalty offenses, but I'm not sure what they are. Those are the big three. So I think in all three of those cases, we're not going to actually execute unless the person was warned, did it immediately after the warning. There were witnesses both to the crime itself and the warning. In the absence of all those elements, we're not going to actually execute the person. Usually we're talking about, is the death penalty applicable, right? What you're asking me is I think you're asking me, would a murder case be different, let's say, than an idolatry case? In terms of how the witness testimony is taken before the judges, or how the death penalty is applied. And I'm not aware of a difference, sort of a procedural difference in those kinds of cases. But we'll learn a lot more about these kinds of laws and these kinds of questions in Tractate Sanhedrin when we get there. Joseph asks, I had family friends I grew up and were very close with who were girls. I always thought they were cousins, or thought of them that way. I would not have dated them or tried to marry them. But in this halakha, would that be forbidden anyway? Family friends, no. No. It's just where they grew up in the same house and, presented themselves to the outside world as brother and sister, right? Like, you just thought of them as siblings. Not just that they grew up, from the time they were babies. There's a couple that my buddy and I, went to school. We've been buddies for decades. I got married, he got married, and we call them family, right? He's not my cousin, but we're close, and the two couples are close, and our kids and their kids kind of grew up together, kind of having like what you're describing, a cousin-like relationship. But they're not even cousins, they're just friends, and everybody knows that. What we're talking about here is where, like a blended family, like the Brady Bunch, right? So like the kids grew up together with one set of parents, and everyone around them thought of them as brother and sister, right? Brother and sister. That would create that presumptive status that if those people slept together, that they committed incest. Then he also says, Joseph, can this issue of seclusion boil down to intention? Now, seclusion is what's prohibited. We don't, apply death penalty or anything just because they were secluded. The only time that seclusion can be prohibited, the only time that seclusion leads to actual consequences, right, is in the case of the sota, right, where a woman was warned not by her husband not to seclude herself with a particular man because there are rumors that, she might have done something with that man. So the husband says, do not put yourself in a situation where you're secluded with that man. And then she does that, and witnesses see the seclusion, right? Then she's rendered a sota, the suspected adulteress, and the husband and wife are prohibited to each other until they go to Jerusalem when the temple is standing, and she drinks the bitter water. And if she didn't commit adultery while she was secluded with the man, then she's going to be fine, and the husband and wife are going to be permitted to each other again. That's where seclusion itself has real important consequences. But what we're learning here is just the general idea that seclusion is prohibited, really as a fence around the Torah, right? If they don't seclude themselves together, then they're not going to take the next step of giving into their evil inclination and doing the actual prohibited deed of extramarital sex or adultery or incest or something like that. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific for page 81. And then on Wednesday, God willing, we'll have a short page and make a siyum, celebrate the completion of Tractate Kiddushin and Seder Nashim, the first half of the Talmud. And then we'll enter the fourth of the 6 Seders, Seder Nezikin, with Tractate Bava Kama. So that siyum will be on Wednesday. Have a great